Heroes. I'm Mark Seifter, and this is Arcane Mark. Hello everyone, and welcome to Class Chat Fighter, the episode that is definitely not Class Chat Monk. Today we're going to talk about the fighter, not the monk. It is a class that, while not being the monk, also has a lot of distinctive flavor to it in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that was actually, pretty hard to deliver. Because the fighter class, at its root, is just this is someone who fights, and they're really trained in fighting, and different weapons, and combat, and in some ways, that's a very generic class fantasy. So, because of that, it means that it's a little challenging in a lot of games that have a fighter-type class to really give that fighter-type class its own identity. And so, we worked really hard. It was one of the core 4 classes to make sure that the fighter class had one for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And like I said before, with the core 4 classes, it got passed around from everybody, vertical slices, and it was iterated on so many times. So many times, even before the alpha version and then the beta version and everything. So, let's take a look at our fighter class. Our fighter, Valeros! He's got a shield and sword. So, according to the core rulebook, fighting for honor, greed, loyalty, or simply the thrill of battle, you are an undisputed master of weaponry and combat techniques. You combine your actions through clever combinations of opening moves, finishing strikes, and counterattacks. And wherever your foes are unwise enough to drop their guard. Whether you're a knight mercenary, sharpshooter, or blade master, you have honed your martial skills into an art form and perform devastating critical attacks on your enemy. Key abilities, strength or dexterity, you get to choose. Are you strength? Are you dex base? You get 10 hit points per level. So in terms of role-playing the fighter, the core rulebook says that during a combat encounter, you strike with unmatched accuracy and use specialized combat techniques. A melee fighter stands between allies and enemies, attacking foes who try to get past. A ranged fighter delivers precise shots from a distance. During social encounters, you can be an intimidating presence. This can be useful when negotiating with enemies. It's sometimes a liability in more genteel interactions. While exploring, you keep up your defenses in preparation for combat and keep an eye out for hidden threats. You also overcome physical challenges in your way, breaking down doors, lifting obstacles, climbing adeptly, and leaping across pits. In downtime, you might perform manual labor or craft and repair armaments. If you know techniques you no longer favor, you might train yourself in new ones. If you've established your reputation, you might build an organization or stronghold of your own. As a fighter, you might know the purpose and quality of every weapon and piece of armor you own. Recognize that the danger of an adventurer's life must be balanced out with great revelry or ambitious works. Have little patience for puzzles or problems that require detailed logic or study. You might not. You could be a different kind of fighter. Others probably find you intimidating until they get to know you, and maybe even after they get to know you. Expect you're all brawn and no brains, or respect your expertise in the art of warfare and value your opinion on the quality of armaments. So that's sort of what some of the possibilities are for the way people think about you as a fighter. So your initial proficiency is expert in perception, fortitude, and reflex save, trained in will. You choose your choice of acrobatics or athletics, probably acrobatics for dexterity or athletics for strength, but it's up to you. +3 plus your intelligence modifier. And here's the big one. You're an expert in simple and martial weapons, trained in advanced weapons, and an expert in unarmed attacks, while being trained in armor, unarmored defense, and fighter class DC. Nobody else starts out expert in attacks. Nobody else, with the exception of the Playtale Gunslinger, right? But that's just in guns. And nobody else gets to be a master at 5th level, which is what you're going to do as the fighter. As you keep advancing, you also start with an attack of opportunity, so if anybody moves past you, basically, or out of your reach, makes a ranged attack in your reach, or uses manipulate or move action, you can take a swipe at them as a reaction. You've got shield block in case you want to use a shield. You've got At 3rd level, you've got Bravery, which is enhances your will save up to expert, but gives you a little bit extra, where you can reduce your frightened condition value when you get it, which is very, very handy against a lot of fear effects. Throw a little bit of fear on you anyway when you make your save. And this is very handy because if you roll a success, you get a critical success against fear, so you probably didn't get anything. And even if you failed your save, it gets reduced by 1. Let's see. Yeah, you get Master in a certain weapon group at level 5. That's super early. Level 7, you get not only Master in Perception, but you get +2 on Perception for Initiative, which is pretty handy. It's not all of Incredible Initiative, and it does mean that, like, if the GM lets you roll something other than Perception, it's very rare that you're actually going to be better than your Perception with the additional +2. But, hey, you got Weapon Specialization, like most Marshals at level 7. Level 9, Combat Flexibility gives you a fighter feat of 8th level or lower that you can switch out each day, in addition to Fortitude Master. Level 11, you get Expert in Heavy Armor, faster than most people. Heavy, medium, and light. Not faster than champions. And your fighter expertise in fighter class DC. At 13, you become legendary in one group of weapons and master in the rest. That's when most people are getting master. 15, you get master in reflex saves from evasion and greater weapon specialization, plus another flexible feat that can be even higher level, up to 14th. At 17, you get master in armor, and at 19, you're legendary in every weapon, except for except for some of the advanced weapons, right? But everything else, and your fighter class DC increases to master. So you're all about having really, really, really accurate things with weapons that other people are not going to have it the way that you have it. So that is like somewhat a math thing, but it really also shapes your identity to be more accurate, because it means you're, like it said in the description, you're getting critical hits more often and putting in your critical focus effects, and you can use things a little more differently than everyone else. So there are multiple classes that have something called a press, although fighters had them first, which are attacks where something happened, you have to use them after you've already attacked once and gotten a multiple attack penalty, and then something special happens on them. But if you're a fighter, you're pretty likely to hit with your press because your accuracy was so high on the first attack. Like maybe a certain kind of ranger would be too. They certainly, they do some different things with their styles, but with the fighter, it's like, oh, I'm just so accurate on my first attack that even my second attack is not that much less accurate than everybody else, especially if you're using an agile weapon. Fighters also have opens where they so they lead in with an open, they can finish up with a press, they can enter stances, special combat stances, and they've got flourishes, which a lot of the martial classes have, which are sort of only one flourish per round. Flourishes often do something pretty special or give you more action economy in a way that you kind of wouldn't necessarily want to be like, well, I flurried of blows and then did this other thing and then did this other thing and I made 6 attacks. So those are some of the special key term kinds of attacks that the fighter has. But looking through, you have the option to sort of define yourself as a fighter. So you can be now with some of the other classes like druid, we said there were orders of the druids, and you picked a deity for the cleric, and whether you were war priest or cloistered cleric, and so on. But the fighter doesn't have sort of any of those like subclass type options. Instead, you just pick what you want to do with your fighter. It's all going into your combat style. So if you're a 2-weapon fighter, you can't go wrong with Double Slice, one of the starting fighter feats that lets you hit once with each weapon without a multiple attack penalty. But there's also good options for any kind of style, just right off from the beginning. Sudden Charge is pretty good for any melee, where you move up twice and then attack once for 2 actions. Just a good, really good feat. Anybody could get good use out of it. Reactive Shield is, because it requires you to have a shield that you haven't used yet, it's just, it's like a step up from some of the ones that are like, I don't need a shield and I'm just still going to get a +2 on one attack. But reactive shield lets you put up your shield reactively and get a +2 on that attack and every other attack afterwards. So it's a very handy one. Synergize with the shield fighter when you didn't have enough time to get the shield up. You're not going to be able to block, not yet at least, but it's still a good one. Exacting Strike is a fun one where potentially where you really know you need to get another hit. It's a press that if it misses, it doesn't increase your multiple attack penalty. So you can wind up doing your open or your first attack, and then it's like, I need one more hit and this enemy is down. So you can Exacting Strike and then Exacting Strike again. And if you're hasted, you can strike again at the end, and that's still, if you miss both of the other times, still only at your first multiple attack penalty. So you're really, really likely, even against a boss, to hit by the end of that combination. There's also Power Attack for when you want to do one big hit on your enemy. It's particularly good against enemies with like hardness or resistances or some kind of weird acid that hits you every time you attack them, or some other reason that you want to combine things into one. Extra good also if you have some reason that like your next attack is better. For instance, if your allies are aiding you, like you have maybe a swashbuckler who's using One for All, or you've got something that is like only on one attack and not all your attacks, suddenly Power Attack gets a massive benefit compared to making multiple attacks, because you can pile that all of that like on your next attack into one thing that's all hitting together. If you're thinking about Power Attack in terms of, oh, I just take it and it's better than attacking multiple times every time always, that's not generally going to be the case. And it's best for big weapons because it gives you more damage dice of the weapon. There's also Point Blank Shot stance. It's a stance that lets you use longbows like right up in people's faces. And with short bows, you can do a little bit more damage too. Eventually, it works out better in damage for the longbow. It starts out slightly ahead for the short bow. And, of course, the longbow has longer range. There's also Snagging Strike if you have a hand free. There's something for every style, like I said, where you can mess around with the enemy by snagging them with your free hand. And that's just at first level. The fighters have an extreme breadth of feats. And it just continues onward, giving the fighters a lot of options. And that's just in the core rulebook, too. There's more cool fighter feats that were in the Advanced Player's Guide that add on to your options with the fighter. And it's particularly fun because you get to choose feats eventually every day. So you get to look through those and be like, which of these fighter feats do I want today? And then you take the one that you want that day. So, the fighter feats continue onward. You get things that can give you extra reactions for attack of opportunity, or extra reactions for shield blocks. If you're a shield blocker, you can pick up feats to like leap into the air and attack your enemy, or like stab them with a piercing weapon and reveal them when they're invisible. You can get feats like Certain Strike, where even if you miss on a press, it still does a little bit of damage unless you critically fail. Really, there's a lot of options, and it heads out into the higher level feats like Boundless Reprisals, where you just get a reaction at the start of everybody's turn. That one's pretty wild. And Weapon Supremacy, where you just get a permanently quicken and you get an extra strike every turn. That's a handy one. So there's really a lot of feats for the fighter. The fighter is all about, they've got a lot of feats, they've got a lot of choices for feats. They get more than other people because they get those two extra ones that they can switch around. And so that's what it means, and that's what happens when you're a fighter, is that you have the feats that you need to make your combat style work. You're a professional when it comes to using weapons, and it's sort of your identity is that you're that super skilled weapon user, kind of probably are not just like a warrior who goes in there and attacks, but are drilled like as a soldier or as a blade master or something else that puts you a step above. And that's why you have a lot of the flavor stuff that there at the beginning. Some of the descriptions of like, the purpose and quality of every weapon and piece of armor you own. I'm reminded of like a scene in the Stormlight Archives where one of the characters, Adeline, like has brought like 20 swords or something with him, and he's like, why did you bring all these swords? Well, this one is good for this situation, and it has this quality, and that other sword is good for that situation. Which, that character also reminds me of sort of a thing that fighters have in some games that we were like hoping to avoid with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition fighter, where it's like that particular character who has all the swords and that I reference is like, he's a really good fighter in a series where like everybody except for him is like some kind of ridiculous magic user, and it's definitely a character point for him of like, I'm a really good fighter and everyone else is a ridiculous magic user. So we tried to make sure that it's really fun to be a character who's a really good fighter in a party with ridiculous magic users, and that everybody has something that they're contributing and doing that makes the team better, and that if you work together, it's a lot better to have a fighter in there than just to have 4 wizards curb stomping everything together. That's like, you actually won't curb stomp everything as much, but you will if you have a fighter and the wizard and you have a mixed team. And similarly, 4 fighters is going to run into things that they have trouble with because they don't have the magic users who have certain tools in their tool bag. The fighters are going to really struggle unless they're very careful about what they take. So, and Lava Bean says 4 wizards can be curb stomped by a lot of enemies. Exactly. But like in some games, like if you have the 4 wizards, you can just kind of go to town with 4 wizards, and you're almost better off than with the mixed team, if you have the right strategy for the wizards. But we were hoping that it would be better if you had a mixed group that had some martial characters and some spellcasters, maybe some people who are good at different skills and some people good at other skills, and sort of give the identity to the fighter as someone who you always feel happy when somebody's coming in with another fighter. That sounds good. Considering Warlock says Summon Monster made fighters feel less appealing in prior versions of Pathfinder. That's definitely true. Or Bromford Transmuter in Pathfinder 1st Edition. Yes, there are a lot of things that did that in Pathfinder 1st Edition. And just a lot of other editions that's not Pathfinder 1st Edition, like super more so. Just like in general, when you're playing a game or an RPG, right? It's not just a pile of mechanics and numbers. There's a lot of story to it. Things have to sort of fit the story in a way that when people are playing the story, it feels cool and feels right. But one of the problems with that potentially is that you can have an issue where the answer that you give when does doing this cool thing with the fighter feel right could be no. But if it's magic, then it always feels right to have it do something, right? So like there was more pushback when, for example, I wrote the feat Sudden Leap in the fighter, and that was a very large leap that the fighter was doing. There was a little more pushback from that than like the jump spell that also can jump for about the same amount. Even though the Sudden Leap feat is an 8th level feat that you have to permanently take spend a feat slot on, and the jump spell, the one that lets you do it for the entire combat, is 3rd level spell. You can do it once for a 1st level spell. So there's some amount to which the way that like the story and the world works need to intertwine with the way that the visual and the narrative are, but in a way that makes it so that you're doing cool things with your fighter and cool things with your wizard. And in definitely it's been a case in a lot of like my favorite games to play that the things that feel the coolest are the things that the spellcasters are doing, because magic always feels like something that can do anything, right? Let's see. So people are saying in the chat that Fighter is one of their favorite classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and they're very happy about Fighter. Well, I'm glad, and is a tricky way path to follow, but I think we did well on the Fighter. I'm obviously biased, so only you can decide what the situation is for you for the Fighter. Hida Owin says positioning on the map is very important fighter skill for playing a fighter effectively, because if you're in the right spot, you can sort of have the essence of tanking by giving yourself a really strong attack when they move past you. Yeah, definitely. And Zathos says Fighter Wizard is a really good combo because you have so many feats, you could spend some of them on spellcasting. That's also definitely true. Fighter has that advantage that, and I guess we should get into the archetypes, but Fighter has the advantage that because you have those 2 extra class feats, it might not seem like a lot, but it's a high percentage, right? Because normally you get 11, and 2 extra is almost 20% more. And you only have 10 that could have been archetype feats because the first level feat couldn't. Right, normally, and you have 2 more. So because of that, it's just a little bit easier for fighters to go into any archetype than anyone else and still have the feats that they want or need from Fighter. So in terms of what archetypes you can take with Fighter, well, Zathos started us off. You could take Wizard. You could take almost anything, and you'll do pretty well. Let's take a look at the Fighter archetype itself. Here we have Iakovas, my fighter monk from Pathfinder Society, my -2 character. And Iakovas is here using his one-handed sword while sort of being in a monkish stance. And so fighter dedication requires strength and dexterity 14. You need to be pretty physically adept to get into the fighter dedication. And it gives you simple and martial weapons, your choice of acrobatics or athletics, training in simple martial weapons, and fighter class DC. And then you can get fighter feats. You can get the hit points like all the other ones we looked at that were martial classes up to this point. You can get attack of opportunity at level 4, which is pretty handy, and it's before even other single class classes could get it. You can get the higher level fighter feats with advanced maneuver, and then finally diverse weapon expert at level 12 is going to give you expert in all your simple and martial weapons. The simple part doesn't really matter unless you're a wizard, but the martial part can be helpful. So who does well with multi-class fighter? Well, the core rulebook has some descriptions, some of which have like the multi-class fighter archetype stock fell a little bit in the advanced player's guide when there became those sort of fighting style archetypes that stole some of the lunch of the fighter archetype, but that's fine because like they do better for that vision than just, oh, I have to be a fighter for this. Because it used to be that you would go in there if you wanted to get into a combat style, but you can more efficiently get it by just going into an archetype for just one combat style, unless there's some reason you need to mix them. Then that's when you want to go into fighter for sure. Or the fast attack of opportunity, or getting expert in a whole bunch of martial weapons very quickly. Or, I mean, not that quickly, but without taking a bunch of other feats or being just the right ancestry. So you can be a barbarian fighter, suggested in the core rulebook to get two-handed feats, but you could get that now from Mauler. Champion fighter, so that you can focus on the combat style and like double up on shield stuff that is in the fighter with the shield stuff that's in the champion, but you can get that now with Sentinel. Monk fighter to combine unusual weapon styles using the freehand fighter feats plus monk. That actually is still solid because there's not really an archetype in the advanced player's guide that gives you all of the freehand fighter feats. Ranger fighters, so that you can pick up some of the archery options that weren't in the ranger, can now take the archer archetype if they want to in advanced player's guide. Rogue fighters to take some of the freehand 2-up fighting or archery feats. Well, for freehand, you still want fighter, but you can get 2-weapon warrior or archer if you need to in Advanced Player's Guide, and spellcaster fighters from the additional weapon proficiencies as well as martial kind of feats can be good, especially if you want more than one thing. Like particularly if you want to two weapon fight and shield, it may be less arduous to get some of those basic feats from the fighter archetype than to have to go into two different archetypes to get the dual weapon warrior and the shield stuff. Although dual weapon warrior does kind of give you double slice right away, so it's not too bad even to go into both archetypes. The main thing is you'll need to commit to at least 3 feats in the first before you can go into the second. So there's really a lot of options available other than the fighter archetype now that used to not be available before, but the fighter archetype still has some love and still some value, especially for the feats that don't fit cleanly into a combat style. Whereas the fighter itself can pretty much take whatever it wants for an archetype, and it'll do well. That's generally true with a lot of the classes, but the fighter in particular, like Zato said in the chat, has more feats and therefore has more space to pick up something. So you can either take things from other classes or options that give you even more combat style for your own style that wasn't in the fighter, or you can take something like Zato suggested that gives you something vastly different than what you usually have, so that you can sort of fill in your weaknesses, that the things that the fighters normally can't handle, that you would need to pull in a spellcaster for, while your fighter might actually have a few of those tools up their sleeve. If you take a spellcasting multi-class, for example, it's not going to be as strong as the casters. You're not going to be able to dispel the high-level things that are there, like a sorcerer who has Dispel as a signature spell, for example. But you are going to be able to throw up a haste eventually, or even with just the basic spellcasting benefits, or a fly with the expert spellcasting benefits, and so on. So you can pick up something that gives you more different abilities. You can pick up something that synergizes with your original abilities. Anything you do, just kind of feel the story of your character and feel the mechanics of what your character is doing, and pick something that seems like it fits, and you're probably going to get a good match. That extra +2 accuracy with your weapons just opens up a lot of doors for you. Let's see. We saw Legends and Lost Omens. Lost Omens, insert name here. Codex would be cool, says Zathos. Is that... I'm not sure what that's with respect for. I guess, like, a potential book that has like, a codex of... Is that, like, NPCs or something? I mean, it could be interesting. Lava Beam takes as many non-combat options as possible on the fighter to help outside of combat. That can be a good idea, too. It just really depends on what you want to do. Stump Monkey points out that Armiger and Hell Knight give you some resistances that can make a huge difference over the course of multiple hits that each give you the resistance each time. That's absolutely true. Don't sleep on small resistances. It might seem like it's like, oh, it's only 2. But over the course of a battle where, you are a fighter, so you have a good number of hit points, and you might even have a shield, so you're reducing some of the damage sometimes, and you get hit like 14 times, and you were healed partially in between that time, it's gonna wind up adding up. With even 2 resistance is gonna add up to like 28 extra damage or hit points, which, depending on what level we're talking about, that can be a pretty substantial amount of more hit points. And you can get more than 2 resistance with those archetypes Stump Monkey was talking about. I'm just using 2 as an example because 2 is the lowest number other than 1. And 1, like, everybody looks at 1 and thinks it's not gonna add that much until they play with the bar with Inspire Courage on attack rolls. But 2 is definitely still one that doesn't seem like a lot, but for resistance it can help you a lot. And Lava Bean's talking about resources with pre-built characters. as I mentioned in the pre-show, there's a blog that is up right now that has a new Aphrodite Kobold pre-built NPC. It can be a fun one to throw into your game. And there tend to be some pre-built characters on the Paizo.com blogs. Alright, so we talked about archetypes, and we talked about multi-class, and we talked about the fighter. Just in general, the fighter doesn't have as complicated of a framework because it's all about customizing your own fighter. And so I think that kind of gives us what we need to know about the fighter to think about the fighter. And it sounds like people in chat are pretty happy about the fighter, so that's good. I think that I've definitely seen in games, like in my War for the Crown game, we had two fighters that were very different. One of them was a shield, sort of a switch hitter with Dwarven War Axe. Either Dwarven War Axe and shield, or if necessary, two-hand the Dwarven War Axe for extra damage in situations where she couldn't tank. And that was a very effective fighter. That was what Linda was playing. And then the other fighter was playing like the weirdy, trickiest random fighter who was like not intending to really do damage. It was whip and shield, and basically the entire build, and it had like rogue multiclass for that reaction where you move with the enemy when they move. The entire build was based around disruptive and hitting things that were trying to cast spells so that their spell got interrupted. So it had he had the extra reaction for attack of opportunity, so if something moved away, he followed them and then attack of opportunity and hit them and disrupted their spell. If they didn't move away, he disrupted their spell and then maybe disrupted a second spell if they had a quicken spell because of the extra attack of opportunity. And just in general, he was very, very good against a subcategory of foe that the rest of the team didn't have like perfect answers against. It definitely led to a situation where they once fought a powerful spellcaster who he disrupted the spell. Like the way the encounter worked was two angels just randomly appear and cast heal, and but the wizard and the cleric both had counterspell and the ability to counterspell heal. And so they both countered the two like 7th level heals that were going to heal the boss up to like very close to full, and then they killed it. And I was like, miracle? Nope. Got interrupted. It was pretty great. So Fighter wasn't the only one who was participating there, but that tricky fighter was definitely sometimes really the saving grace for the group, and the shield fighter absolutely sometimes like stood in a doorway when they were adding on multiple encounters and was like, no, she tanked all of one of the encounters that was adding on from that doorway while the rest of the party fought the other encounter. And, there was a healer who I think didn't have to heal her, but could have if she needed to, but she was kind of a wall with that shield and keeping the enemies, and she had cover from some of the attacks because she was standing in the doorway. Fighters could do a lot of really interesting and cool things. So, let's see. People are talking about the idea for NPC Codex to get some memorable NPCs to slaughter. Zadla says Fighter Champion Wizard Cloister Cleric group is so hard to take down. That's definitely true. The champion to throw in the reaction to lower damage, the Cloister Cleric for healing. Wizards got every tool up their toolkit. Yeah, my group was Wizard, Cloister Cleric, Fighter, and also had it was bigger than 4 people, but the ones I talked about here today were Fighter, Wizard, Cloister Cleric, but they had a Bard with champion dedication who was throwing the champion reaction too most of the time. And that group was like phenomenally resilient and effective in a huge number of situations. The wizard would just create so many disintegrates with True Strike. It was pretty wild. There was like this evil boss elf monk, and she didn't have great fortitude because she is an elf, and that was like her weaker of the 3 saves. And he crit her with a disintegrate, and it turned a failure just barely into a critical failure against the boss. And she survived being disintegrated, I think, initially, but she was at almost no hit points. And oh no, I think what it was is someone else had hit her for a little bit first, and then the disintegrate was just enough to kill her. And the other monks just, their morale condition was, we never surrender. We never surrender. And, but I decided that they did surrender when the party stumbled into their boss immediately, and they saw her being just disintegrated instantly. And she was like their grandmaster who taught them their entire monk style, that like that maybe caused them to flee instead of fight to the death, because it's like, that's pretty bad. Let's see. Fighter Witch. Rhino Rex points out could potentially use nail attacks. That could work. Novel Being says set fire to the room and leave the fighter at the door. Could also work. Especially if you have that fighter Linda was playing who can just like guard the door. Zathos uses high-powered adjectives for fighters annihilating weaker foes with one hit where massive overkill is involved. I can see that, because you're just going to crit and crit with fighters against swarms of weaker foes, because, well, I mean, you're legendary eventually in your attacks, and those weaker foes do not have the armor class to stand up to it. And one thing that I've learned is, like, everything is always flat-footed. When people are doing analyses of accuracy, and they don't say that everything is flat-footed, especially at higher levels, they tend to be really inaccurate to real play. It was funny because, like, the other day Logan was looking at spells. He's like, none of these spells I'm looking at flat-foot you. And then, like, Mike and James and I are like, did you remember the ones that flat-foot you by knocking you prone, and the ones that flat-foot you by blinding you, which technically doesn't say that it makes you flat-footed, but does make you everything hidden to you, which makes you flat-footed, and these other ones? And he's like, oh yeah. Yeah, everything makes you flat-footed. So, when you've got a flat-footed foe with a fighter, Hida Owen says, pick fighter supremacy. Pick fighters can be pretty nasty. Also, yeah, don't sleep on aiding the fighter. Like, you can aid a pick fighter who's going to do a power attack, or throw in Zathos' combo with the wizard. Imagine this. So, you have, say, maybe it's even a one-for-all swashbuckler who aids your pick fighter, right? And gives the pick fighter +4 on one attack. Then the fighter is a fighter wizard and true strikes, and then attacks with the pick. Power attack. That is going to be really, really nasty for the enemy, because assuming they're flat-footed, which they probably are, like, you have I think at that point, even against a boss, a really, really high chance of that going to be a power attack crit. And it's going to have the extra dice, and they're all going to be fatalized into the biggest possible die, and it's going to be a disaster for the enemy. It could be fun. Rhino Rex says fighters are really good at aiding attack because of their legendary attack. That is definitely true. They are really great at it. And, of course, One for All Swashbucklers get to use Diplomacy on it. So that makes them also in that tier. But, yes, you could also just have another fighter who is the one who aids you. Absolutely. Maybe it's an archer who aids your pick fighter with assisting shot. So that they just shoot and then throw in some. I think that doesn't give quite as much as just doing a flat-out aid, though. So maybe they throw a flat-out aid on one of their attacks. There's a lot you can do. And I'm not even getting into what if you had a high-level heroism on that fighter. Because if you have up a 9th level heroism on your... My group was level 17 at the end of War of the Crown. If you have up a 9th level heroism and you're aiding for a +4 on the fighter who drew strikes on their pick with their power attack, that's gonna be pretty carnage full against the probably flat-footed enemy. What even is your accuracy at that point? Because, like, let's say you're fighting like a level 20 severe opponent with like what 45 AC, and you've got plus 17 plus 8 from being legendary is 25, right? And then you've got a plus 2 weapon at least. You may have a plus 3 at that point, but let's say you don't, so that's 27. And then you've got what at this point maybe you got your apex items, so you've got plus 6 from strength, so that's 33, and they're flat-footed down to a 43. And then you got heroism, so you're at 36, and then you were 80, you're at 30, you're at 40 against 43. Maybe we didn't even need to True Strike. That's a 90% hit chance, and of which like 40%, you needed a 13 to crit. Maybe, but the True Strike's still funny though. So if I crit on a 13, and I have True Strike, that means that my chance of not critting is going to be 12 and 20 squared. So it's 0.6 squared, which is 36%. So I have a 2/3 chance of critting with that True Strike power attack that we were just talking about against this boss that's severe 3 levels higher than us boss with the high AC. Neat. Yeah, lots of fun. Let's see. People are saying wild shape fighters are really good. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can kind of abuse the status bonus that is meant to help druids on your fighter. Lava Being says they could be great with bombs because they have a high proficiency in martial weapons. Yeah, I mean, fighter, you're going to do well with whatever you're doing. Hito Owen says a duelist archetype one-handed fighter can be really handy, and quick draw with the bandolier bombs can hit whatever weakness you need. That is absolutely a cool point. Lava Being says bombs are attack roll instead of reflex save. That is right. They are an attack roll. So they're going to splash anyway, but the splash is still going to trigger weaknesses. So they're still a really great thing for anybody, really, if you're going up against something with a weakness. Like, if you are a small village with an alchemist living there, and you get attacked by a frost giant, you probably can actually kill it if you just distribute alchemist fires to everyone in the village. And, like, the frost giant sees you and maybe doesn't know you all have alchemist fire, runs up and, sweeps through and kills 2 of the villagers or more on the first turn, and then you probably kill it on the next turn throwing those alchemist fires. Rico is a small village. Alright. Well, Rico, that makes sense. That explains a lot, I think. So yeah, we've drifted a little bit off topic of fighter, but we're kind of just talking about whatever comes up here. Zathos points out that some of the alchemist buffs can be really useful for fighters. Definitely. We also had an alchemist in War for the Crown, continually helping with, like, Eagle Eye elixirs, so everybody was able to do whatever tactic they wanted and get, like, chances to find secrets automatically. They found, like, everything because the party was full of extra chances to find them. And, like, mutagens that just always were exactly the right thing that the group needed at the time for social situations or outside of combat. Just pumping the wizard full of cognitive mutagens that lasted literally the entire day, which I rolled based on the downtime rules that say that if you could have a buff up literally the entire day that you can use them, that it would allow the wizard to use it. Actually, I guess it was an exploration activity. He was learning spells. So the wizard calculated that the alchemist saved him like thousands of gold pieces. And he gave the alchemist some of the money. He's like, I literally saved 5,000 gold because of you. You take 2,000 of it for just giving me all these cognitive mutagens. Woo! Just a lot of the classes combo well. And especially if you have a big enough group, just throwing in a class that does something different, even if you even think that what the class is doing is not like if you're like, okay, but between these two people in our 6-person group, maybe this one has a tool set that is like broader or that is more damaging, but just by bringing in things that are different, you have more tools for more situations. Because even someone who's not quite as good overall as a tool set out of whichever of the classes are for the overall campaign is going to have some situations where their tool set is just the best tool set. And so that's sort of how a party becomes stronger than the sum of its parts, but in a more than linear way. It's actually also how, as an addition goes on for a game, even if you use all conservative options and you always put out things that are equal or even weaker than the things that came before, that you just make people stronger and stronger due to the flexibility. Like, if you print a spell that only damages vampires, and it's a 3rd level spell, it does more than Fireball, but not by that much, to make up for the fact that it only damages vampires. And then you do that for every creature in the game. Eventually, you've got spells that are going to damage whatever you're actually fighting by more. And that's just sort of like an extreme example, but it's something that bears out. Mixture, having more options, having more abilities will always help you. And the fighter is someone who can adapt to that by changing your feats out each day. And that lets you dabble around in some different feats for and different archetypes if you need to. And Lava Being says fighters can get stronger as more options are increased. That's true, especially since each day you can just go into the feats. And feats, for class feats, are a lot of them are like easy to get access to. They're either common or they appear somewhere where it's like, oh, I can join this organization and get access to them. So that can eventually be like a significant mental burden on someone who is preparing for a fighter. So it's something to keep in mind as the GM, is that if it starts getting out of control, like it's like, oh, the fighter is actually lost because we're so many years into the edition and there's actually 90 class feats that are that the fighter could take. Like 90, I said it, it's a high number, but it's actually not as high as you might think. Well, even in the core rulebook, if we have the ability to take the 14th level class feat or lower, then that gives us 27, 28, 29, 30. $53, $56, $57, $60, $67 just in the core. So actually with APG, you probably are close to 90 already with the 14th level feat. Oh gosh. Now you're probably going to want to mostly, just because of the even though some of those lower level feats like Sudden Charge are good any of the time, the higher level feats tend to be stronger, and there's just the psychological thing where it's like, if I tell you can take a feat up to 14th level, the chances that you actually take a feat that's below 12th level just start vanishing. Even if it's like the perfect feat. You're like, but do I want to spend this thing that can be a 14th level thing on just a 10th level or 8th level feat? Sometimes you will. Linda did it sometimes with her fighter when she had an exact combo for what they were going to do that day. But not very often. Alright. Lava Being points out retraining is a strong option that people can forget. Yeah. For fighters, that's even why retraining is like literally on the first page in downtime. It says, hey, think about retraining. It's literally there, but people forget about it anyway, and just sometimes you don't have the downtime for it. It can happen. Okay, so yeah, I think that's fighters. Let's say goodbye to YouTube and distribute some XP. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.